Happy Wednesday to you, everyone. Hope you're doing well out there. I'm deep in the woods of North Carolina, and I've got a viewer question that actually makes sense answering today, seeing how I'm so deep in the woods. The viewer question is this. This viewer's been practicing search and rescue with their dog, trying to teach her dog how to track a human being that could possibly be lost. And she wanted to know, hey, Bryan, when my dog intersects a trail, the trail left by the human, how does it know which way to go? Seriously, how does it know which way to either to turn right or turn left and go towards the human who is lost? Or will it just backtrack and go all the way back to the originating point of the trail? And that's a really good question, because right here, when dogs come across the trail left by a human, where do they know to go? Do they go back to the picnic table, or do they go to the lost little girl? Right here. I had that happen in 1996. I was a police canine officer at the time, and I got a call to go to a local park, a big park. And this little girl, just about 4 years of age, if I recall correctly, had wandered away from the family picnic table. Now, you kind of wonder, how does that happen? But again, I'm not going to go in that too deep. I just will tell you that there was some substances involved, and the parents lost track of a small child for several hours. Now, as I arrived on the scene, though, here's what had happened. A lot of local authorities had arrived on the scene as well. Let me see if I can hold this thing upright so you guys can get it here. Trying to do multitasking here. And when I arrived on the scene, rangers, park rangers, other police officers, state police, everyone had arrived, and everyone was out calling for the girl, trouncing down the woods, stomping in the woods. In other words, they had contaminated this entire area. This entire area was contaminated with all these footprints, all of the scent of all the searchers, all the people who are trying to find this little girl, and I get that. But the problem is, when I arrived on the scene, the starting point had been obliterated by hundreds of footprints, hundreds of skin rafts and scent coming off of all these searchers looking for that little girl. So in essence, what we had to do, my dog and I, was do what's called an expanding square. And I'm going to pick another little color here. So let me just go ahead and change this to a blue. And we did like an expanding square, meaning we kept going further and further out till finally at one point in the juncture, we did find the trail. And once we found the trail, Yager turned right and followed the trail until we found the little girl about an hour and a half later. This girl had been separated for several hours, was lost, obviously very visibly shaken, upset, and Yager did the right thing. He found her in the right amount of time, and the reason being is that he knew which way to go. There'd be nothing worse than all of a sudden working for about an hour, doing an expanding square, come across the trail, then your dog just follows all the way back to the originating point, back to the picnic table and back to the rescuers. So how is this done? It's done real simple. Well, nothing about tracking is simple, but I will tell you this much. It's one of my favorite things to train a dog to do. I love tracking myself. I learned how to track as a young man, and then further in my young adulthood, doing a lot of work out in the wild. I learned how to read animal signs, learned how to track humans. I love it. I can't walk through the woods without naturally looking around and looking for animal sign, following tracks, knowing how recently the animal had passed through that area, what kind of animal it was, so on and so forth. And I love to train dogs to do the same thing. So how do you do what I call intersecting the T? When you come across that trail, what does the dog know to do? Well, it's real simple. I'm just going to draw a footprint on here. In the very beginning, when you're doing your foundational work, you take into account that humans tend to walk as bipeds in a fashion in which heel first. As we move and we just kind of wander around, kicking up a bunch of debris, kicking up a bunch of leaves, bunch of limbs, or whether we're just walking on a manicured lawn, it doesn't matter. We tend to step off and then land heel to toe, heel to toe, heel to toe. So therefore, in the very beginning of training, when you're teaching your dog to track, you want to teach the dog to follow the scent signature from heel to toe. And the way we do that is by putting treats only in the toe. Only in the toe. And also by making sure that the dog tracks forward. Never is the dog allowed to turn around and track backwards. If you missed a treat, you just missed it. You got to keep going in a staggered fashion. One step, next step, next step, next step, next step, next step, all the way through. In the beginning, it's a scheduled reinforcement. Every single footprint you come across, your nose will come across the heel most likely first, then follow that scent up to the toe, and there's your treat. And then, of course, it goes to a variable reinforcement later on. There were about maybe every 30th footstep, there's a treat. Maybe every 60th footstep, there's a treat. And then maybe there's 3 treats in a row until finally the only reward is the one that you get at the very end. And at the end, that can be a number of things. It can be a dog's favorite toy. It can be one of the dog's favorite persons, people that the dog really likes. And you can have just pop out of the bushes and go, hey, I'm here. You found me. Great job. It's a wonderful, wonderful discipline. And I just find it just incredibly relaxing when I'm doing it. You've got to stay on top of the dog. You've got to know what you're doing with it. There's so many other aspects of tracking that I hope to cover in future videos, because anyone that wants to really enjoy being out in nature, being with their dogs, and teaching them something that is incredibly natural. Wow, tracking is it. What I call man tracking, where you put your nose to the ground. And in future videos, I'll talk about the difference between what we call air scenting, meaning you're kind of localizing. You're just trying to come across a scent cone that's coming off of that lost human. And what's the difference between that and actually putting your nose to the ground and tracking? I'm a big believer in tracking. Those scents last longer. They don't decay as quickly as air scents do. But again, in the very beginning, it's a matter of teaching the dog a discipline, heel to toe. That heel signature, scent signature, is going to be a little bit different than that toe signature. And you're only allowed to go one way. You never get to turn around and come back down the trail. And you just have to do this. So that's the work part. You got to stay right up on top of that dog and make sure it's moving along the track. Later, they can learn how to do what's called scent discrimination, to where this track will go over many tracks, many different tracks, but the dog stays with that one particular track. Very difficult to do, especially if it's been obliterated recently, like in the case of the search and rescue, the little girl there that I did, the tracking that Yager and I did. But we got it done because that's how he was trained, heel to toe. So there you go. There's the answer to your question. That's how dogs know which direction to go. They know which way. And that's really cool, and it can really save a human's life. There was another incident that occurred in which a very elderly lady walked out of her home, sub-freezing temperatures. She had Alzheimer's. She had no clue where she was going and why she was leaving her home, but she did. She did in the wee hours of the morning. And she would have frozen to death had it not been for Yager having that discipline, heel to toe. So there you go, guys. I hope I whetted your appetite just a little bit about tracking, because it's really neat. It is one of my favorite things to train a dog to do. And it's a great way and a good excuse to get out into the wild. So hope that helped answer your question. Maybe just piqued a little curiosity, and let me know. And if you want me to talk more about tracking later on, I'll be glad to do so. And I'll be glad to demonstrate in some upcoming videos using a dog that's never tracked in its life. So you can see how it gets started. And then hopefully we just kind of progress through here. And I'll just kind of show you guys the beginning, the middle, and the end. But it's way cool. Heel to toe, that's how it gets done. All right, guys, I'll be checking in with you again tomorrow from the mountains here in North Carolina. Until then, have a great training day, and make sure that when you work with your dog, it's all discipline. You're focused on what you're doing at that moment, whether it be tracking, whether it be obedience.